Hey guys, we're going to take a look at coil splitting our humbucker guitar. Um, what coil splitting does is it allows us to get two sounds out of each pickup that we have. Um, we can toggle a humbucker sound, and we can also toggle into a single coil sound. And essentially what we're doing is we're grounding out one of the coils, so only one of the coils is picking up the sound and sending the signal to our amp. For this mod myself, I used two Gibson 57 Classics that I put into a Les Paul style guitar. And I also used a two-wire conductor, which was something that I had to take into consideration while doing this mod. So let's take a look at what we have to do. Alright, before we get into the meat of this modification, one thing that we really need to think about is taking care of our guitar when we're modding it. We always want to use some sort of cloth in order to protect the body of the guitar so that it's not all scratched up when we get through. We're going to want to remove the strings, and you're probably going to want to remove the bridge and the saddle. And before you do that, you'll want to take some measurements to kind of find out about what were the heights of your all the pieces on your guitar. So when you come back, you don't have to spend lots of time making sure intonation and string height is all good. You're going to want to keep a bag full of all the screws that you had so you don't lose any of those. And you're going to want to unscrew most of the parts that you find on the front of your guitar. You can also take off the knobs of your pots by just tugging them off. Sometimes it helps to wedge a pick underneath it and use it for a little leverage. But we always just want to be using our guitar or handling our guitar with care. Also, some supplies that you're going to need. Some wires, preferably colored wires, so you can tell which wire is coming from where. That can be very helpful. Just some extra bits of wire. You're going to need a soldering gun. You're going to need some solder. And you're going to need, one thing that's very nice is to have either some shrink tubing or electrical tape, so you can really make sure that none of those wires that you soldered together are touching anything else. Alright, so here's my pickup, and as you can see, it has a metal cover around it. So one thing that made it difficult, instead of a regular wrapped humbucker, we had to cut through these two little soldered pieces of metal in order to get into our humbucker in order to make the changes and add the wires that we needed. So that was one level of difficulty. Obviously, if you don't have a metal cover, you can just remove the wrapping around it. Always using a lot of caution when you're handling a pickup because you don't want to damage any of the coils on the inside. One other thing that you can see if you look is I cut away some of the metal right around there. That is because when I was doing this, I could not fit all the wires that I added through the pre-made hole, so we had to cut a little bit away in order to do that. Part of that was a mistake on my part. I added one too many wires to my humbucker, so hopefully that doesn't happen to you, and hopefully you can get the wires all the way through without cutting away any extra metal. So what I have here is my humbucker removed from its metal cover, and it looks just like a wrapped open air humbucker. So I removed all the wrapping around it, and I came to these two white wires that are soldered together. They're going to be tucked away right here in between the two coils of your humbucker. So you're going to want to pull those out. Some black wax is going to be kind of flaking off of there. That's okay. It's just some wax from when they potted the humbucker to make sure nothing rattles in there. So don't worry about that. We just want to use a lot of caution when we're handling the humbucker. So what we're going to use those two wires are, we're going to add a singular wire to that little outlet right there. What I did on accident was I added 2 wires to each white wire. So I split the white wires and I added a wire. Don't do that. That doesn't help you at all. So that was just a mistake I had made on my part. Just add 1 wire to that outlet. When soldering wires together, I found it particularly helpful if you use shrink tubing. What shrink tubing is it's like a hollow tube. You can put it around wires and you can solder the wires together. But if you apply heat to the shrink tubing, it shrinks over the open air metal. So if you don't want any interference with that metal touching anything else, shrink tubing is certainly very helpful. So here's my finished humbucker, where I accidentally had those 2 wires. You can see them right here. So again, that's not, you don't want to do that. You're just going to want to have 1 wire coming from the 2, and that will just follow out. So those red and blue wires essentially act as the same wire. So don't do what I did. So here is my my pot configuration that I had before I added the new pots, which I'll show you in just a second. What's really important is before you make any changes to your guitar, to find out where everything is coming from and where it's going, what they're connected to. Make sure you have all those colors. You just want to be sure that you know everything that's going on in your guitar. So these are your tone pots, and they're connected to your volume pots, and you're going to want to make sure you know where those are connected, how they're connected, and you're going to want to know which one is your rhythm and which one is your treble pot. And same goes for your humbucker, which humbucker is your rhythm. Generally the rhythm is the neck pickup, and the treble is the bridge pickup. Here on my 57 Classics, they have shielded wire, so this metal wire that you see coming out of here, that acts as a ground. So that was soldered to the tops of my pots. Inside there was another wire that I would run into my pot that wasn't part of the shielded, but it all came out in 1 wire. Here shows my switch, so I just wanted to make sure at this point in time of the modification process to know which wires are which. So this is a push-pull pot. This is what you're going to want to use to do your modification process. This is where it gets a little bit tricky. This up here not only serves as a pot, this whole area is the pot area where you can change volume or tone, but this right here, it clicks up and it clicks back down. And what that essentially does is when it's clicked down, these 4 pegs are hot, and when it's clicked up, these 4 pegs are hot. So that's kind of important information that you're going to need when doing this. This is really the really important part. I put these in my volume slots. You can put them in your tone slots if you wish, but I'm using the wire configuration that I would find on my volume pot. So I'm going to first look at these top 3 pegs. So coming from X, I had it going out to switch, so I'll just name it switch. Coming from Y, that was going to my tone pot. And from Z, I had to solder to a ground. So for a ground, I basically just used the base of my pot. So this large rectangular area that's right here I used as a ground on the sides. Now if we're going to look at our lower pegs, you have to have a wire running from B to Y. What that basically does is it connects the pot to the switch, okay? So before that wire is added, those aren't connected, so you manually have to add that wire. Going to B was your original humbucker wire. So this was what was in the shielded wire for me at the very beginning. And that would be where you would attach just a singular humbucker wire. Going to E, I had my new wire added. And I'll tell you why I do that in just a second. And then from D, I also had going to ground. So I have two ground connections on this humbucker. One from the top peg and then one from peg D. And then also you're going to also have another ground coming straight from your humbucker. Where that's grounded, it's generally grounded also on the pot. You can use anywhere where I just talked about, or you can use a little peg that's near the bottom. You just have to make sure that your humbucker is grounded so there's none of that buzz. So why did this happen over here? Basically, what we're having is this original humbucker is perpetually hot. It's always going. So no matter if the switch is up or the switch is down, that B is always on. Same with that other wire. That other wire is on. But the only difference is at peg D, when the switch is up, E, which is connected to D at that point in time, is grounded out. So we are grounding out one of those wires when we're pushing up the switch. B will always stay on because these aren't connected at all to here. So that's basically what's going on in this process. So here's my pot that is all wired up. It's quite messy. As you see, adding those two wires really did not help me at all. It just made the whole thing a lot messier and a lot more delicate. It was not fun to have those two wires pushing around on each other, but those two wires were just together. So if you want to take a look at this just a little bit, you can, but it's pretty messy to understand. One thing that I'd like to draw your attention to, however, is right there. That's where I soldered one of my grounds. Over here is another spot where I soldered my ground. And then right here you can see that shrink tubing that I put over the wire to make sure that none of its connections were touching anything and making a little sound, you know, don't want any of that. So this is basically it. After you put this in, you're going to have to put the pot back into the hole that remains from your old pot. Our pot was a little bit bigger, so we actually had to drill a slightly bigger hole through the guitar in order to fit this pot where your knobs go, where people see through the hole that remains in your guitar. One little funny thing that happened with mine is that my knobs were actually reversed from what this pot turns. So my old pots, when I turned it clockwise, say, the volume would go up, and when I turned it counterclockwise, the volume would go down. For these pots were the opposite. So what I had to do was I wrapped some tape around the knobs that show all the numbers, and I just took a pen and wrote down. It kind of gives it a nice little authentic touch to it, I suppose. That's one thing that kind of threw me off right after. So thanks for watching. I hope this helps. You're welcome if it helps. leave some comments to ask some questions if you need anything